and welcome for Crash Course World History. I am your host, Antoinette. Join me today as we travel back in time to one of the pinnacles of Chinese expansion, the Ming Dynasty. To fully understand how the Ming Dynasty came to be, we must go back to the 12 to 1300s, to the Yuan Dynasty. Since the Yuan Dynasty was ruled by Mongols, as we've learnt, the dynasty was ruled by Khans and followed Mongol customs and laws. Under great influence of the Mongols, a rich blend of nomadic and Chinese culture emerged. The Red Turbans overthrew the Yuan Dynasty, and their leader, Zhu Yuanzhang, declared a new era for China, the Ming Dynasty. The Ming Dynasty lasted from 1368 to 1644. The word Ming itself means brilliance or illumination. The dynasty successfully expanded in a great extent during the early modern period through the expansion of trade, culture, and international relations. After overthrowing the Yuan Dynasty and formally establishing the Ming under the leadership of Zhu Yuanzhang, this period in China was a revival of traditional Chinese culture and values. Zhu Yuanzhang, also known as the Hongwu Emperor, was born into peasantry to a rather poor family. Although after joining the rebel army, he surrounded himself with Confucian scholars, educated himself, and persevered through hardships. With the help of others, he created an effective administration during the Ming. He had an interest in education, building government and private schools, and tried to restore old Confucian values such as the civil service exams. This civil service system was established in 1370, but suspended again in 1373 due to minor issues, but was reinstated once again in 1385. The creation of this group formalized the idea of a Grand Secretariat. Although with a group of advisors, the Hongwu Emperor still directly ruled China rather than using chief ministers like the Mongols did. This centralized authority wrote new modernized and traditionally Chinese code of laws, such as the strict Da Ming Lu, also known as the Great Ming Code. After the death of the greatly admired Hongwu Emperor in 1398, his son ascended the throne. However, a few years after his reign, civil war broke out, leading up to the rebellion of Zhu Di, Zhu Yuanzhang's fourth son, to go against his nephew. Zhu Di overthrew his nephew in 1402 and proclaimed himself the Yongle Emperor. No, it is not the Yongle, it is Yongle. In the early years of Zhu Di's reign, the northern frontier, which separated the Ming from the defeated Yuan, was relatively quiet. But in 1410, the rise of the Tatars brought Zhu Di's attention back to the Mongols, patrolling and even personally leading 5 expeditions to crush the remaining of the Yuan dynasty. China continued its shift from agricultural and rural communities to commercial and urbanization. Zhu Di favored a Muslim eunuch named Zheng He and sent him out to explore and expand China's maritime sea travel. These journeys created new opportunities and connections, and as Patrick Menzies puts it, long before Christopher Columbus, the celebrated Chinese navigator Zheng He traveled through south and westward maritime routes in the Indian Ocean and established relations with more than 30 countries in Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. During this time, Chinese architecture flourished. A 15-year construction project was funded by Zhu Di, building new walls, palaces, gardens, streets, and residential areas. Although the Great Wall had been built in earlier times, most of what is seen today was either built or repaired by the Ming Dynasty. The brick and granite work was enlarged, the watchtowers were redesigned, and cannons were placed along the wall. In 1424, Zhu Di died, marking the death of one of the most influential rulers in Chinese history. However, the flourishing of Chinese art, culture, trade, and international relations continued to thrive even after the death of the Yongle Emperor. With their developing relationships with foreign countries, many exotic goods were exported and brought overseas, while many from other countries were also imported into the Chinese mainland. From the Americas, peanuts, corn, white potatoes, sweet potatoes were shipped in and enjoyed by the population. Nowadays, these foods are an iconic part of Chinese cuisine. Tea became an important item in Chinese exports. The Dutch imported tea from China and fueled the love of tea in Europe. Thanks to the trade of tea and other goods, such as silk and porcelain, the Chinese acquired silver from European countries. Many commercial port cities, including Beijing, Nanjing, were also established to trade with Japan and Europe. Although it wasn't exactly controlled by the Ming Dynasty, by showing a presence and meeting with so many different countries, China gained morale and was looked up to. Unfortunately, this prominence over the Indian Ocean was only a short-term effect because after the death of Judy, these voyages were canceled. Later into the dynasty, foods from America led to a rapid population growth by expanding arable land into lands too tilly or too dry for more traditional crops, a long-term demographic impact on China's population. By the end of the Ming Dynasty, there was a population estimated about 150 million people. Many artists, poets, sculptors were born during this time whose art were sold to Europeans. These art pieces, like vases, porcelain, and small sculptures, led to a growth in trade. The selling of these artworks also aided in the increase of silver in China's economy. An estimated about 50% of all the silver mined in the Americas from the mid-15 to 1800s ended up in China. And the silver completely changed the way the economy worked. Before this time, the Chinese people used to trade items with items. But after the arrival of silver, people started to pay each other in silver, which often caused disputes between them. China had grown rich with silver as its wealth increased, and because of that, rulers also had grown lazier, neglecting their duties, which paralleled to the attitudes of the wealthy Europeans during the same time. As emperors neglected their duties, other officials gained more power, since there was no one to rule over them. And often, officials who did not have much influence tried various ways to gain it. Wealth does a strange thing to us, doesn't it? As China acquired more and more wealth, it led to corruption and the court officials and domination of eunuchs. In this period, the exploitation from the ruling class often caused rebellions that racked in the country in the 17th century, and the aggressive military expansion of the Manchus. In the end, the Ming Dynasty went bankrupt, a sad ending for a great era. It is a generally accepted idea that wealth leads to happiness. However, does it really? Looking back at the Ming Dynasty, its ups and downs, when were people truly happy? Was it when they had acquired gold? Was it when they connected with different people in the Indian Ocean? When were they truly looked up to as a nation? The Ming Dynasty's grand opening featured the Hongwu Emperor, Zhu Yuanzhang, with his vigilant and powerful character, sustained an effective administration. followed by the grandiose expansion in international relations and the blossoming of artistry under the perpetually happy Yongle Emperor Zhu, ending with, unfortunately, bankruptcy and corruption in the ruling class. Despite the typical downfall of an empire, the peak of the Ming Dynasty truly expanded, and not only through influence and trade, it also produced a rich culture that still permeates and exists today.
Thanks for crashing with us today in this episode of Sophomore Crash Course World History. I'm Antoinette. We'll see you in class.